Hey everybody, I'm Thomas Logan, and I'm excited to welcome you to Comic Sans Presents Playing a Story. Come geek out with us as we discuss the business behind comic books with a focus on their adaptation into video games. Learn about the challenges and blessings of the comic book landscape for video game writers and developers. With video game writer Wes Locher, comic book writer and artist Juan Navarro, and YouTuber extraordinaire myself of Red Bandana Gaming. A live Q&A will follow, so stay tuned and I hope you guys enjoy.
Hi, my name is Wes Locher. I am a writer with more than a decade of experience across the mediums of comic books, video games, fiction, and nonfiction. My comic book work has been published across the United States, Canada, and the UK by publishers such as Alterna Comics, Marcosia Enterprises, Titan Comics, and Arcana Comics. And my nonfiction work has been featured by outlets such as Wired, Game Developer, and the TED Talks podcast Far Flung.
Hi, my name is Juan Navarro. I am a comic book creator and artist working out of Miami, Florida. I own and operate the Goblin's Heist comic book shop here in Hialeah, Florida. I also run Creature Entertainment, which is a small comic book independent comic book publisher. I've been in it for about 20 years now. I've produced such books as Tommy, Zombie Years, Vigil, which are also on Webtoons right now. I produce web comics, and I've also done covers for Image Comics, Aftershock, Dynamite, and I have an ongoing working relationship with Marvel and Upper Deck, and currently working on my next book.
So we're going to start with part one, playing a story. So the first question is going to be directed towards both of you guys. What are some of your favorite comic book based video games?
Well, I would say for myself, one of the things, remembering is the X-Men arcade game, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the arcade game. Those are the ones that really affected me, because I remember, this is back in the day when Nintendo and stuff like that. Some of the games weren't that great. I mean, I remember playing Spider-Man for the Atari when I was a little kid, and Superman, which made no sense for the Atari. So they didn't really get good until they really hit the arcades. I remember the Punisher arcade game also, where Nick Fury was player 2 for some reason.
I remember.
Yeah, those are great games. And just seeing little bits and being able to fight villains and everything. Marvel versus Capcom, the Marvel fighting game. Those are some amazing ones. And then recently, the ones like the Batman Arkham series, amazing. Just, I don't think I've ever beaten even half of it. I just keep flapping around all of Gotham City and just dropping on people. And then the Injustice game series, when they were doing it with the Mortal Kombat engine and everything else, that was an amazing thing that spun off a great comic book too.
Wes?
Yeah, I agree. I think that we had an interesting start when the arcade games came out. I think that was the first time that for a lot of us we felt like we got to be those characters, and it was a big deal, and it was something that could become a shared experience with your friends or just complete strangers at the arcade. And then we kind of went through a dip where the games weren't that great for a while, and then until the consoles powered up a little bit. Like for me, into the PlayStation 2 or 3 era, when we got some of the Spider-Man movie tie-ins that were really good, and then nowadays any superhero game is great from a technological standpoint. What Insomniac Games did with the most recent Spider-Man games has been absolutely fantastic, and it's probably the closest I've ever felt to being that hero. So I'm very curious to see kind of where we go from here.
Those are all great games. I can definitely say I can relate to Juan myself, because I even have, thanks to Arcade One Up, they've re-released these arcade games that there were no other way to have those, like the Turtles and the X-Men and even Captain America and the Avengers in your home. So those are great games. Personally, like to piggyback off of you, Wes, that Spider-Man game was great, but if you haven't played the current Guardians of the Galaxy, that's a fantastic Marvel adaptation. Sorry about that. But there are a lot of great games, especially going in the past. You guys named quite a few good games that were from characters, and some people they don't even know that the Ninja Turtles are comic book characters. Got a lot of them back there, but yeah, they're great games.
Yeah. Spider-Man for Dreamcast. I remember when that came out, and it was like one of the things that we're like, wait, you can swing around the city? You can just climb a wall if you want to? Like that open world concept. I think when the game kind of serves this character and it just makes it come alive.
Yeah, there was a great game on there, Spawn in the Demon's Hand on the Dreamcast.
Yeah.
And I love that. Story wasn't much, but you really got to
It was
play as the
fun.
characters.
You know, it's just like, let me be cool with a cape and then
it was
blast
Spawn.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, but speaking about comic to video game adaptations, and maybe this was the game that you were talking about, but there was an Ultimate Spider-Man game that came out back in 2005 from Treyarch, and that was probably the most one-to-one. Let's translate.
Yep.
Yeah, let's translate a comic book to a video game with this using cell shading to mimic how a comic book panel looks.
Yep.
All of the cutscenes actually used comic book panels, and it was all based off of the Ultimate Spider-Man comic book at the time, obviously. So they had a wealth of source material to draw from. But even when you were swinging around Spider-Man, you were fighting enemies. Anytime that you punch people, you kind of had those sound effects that popped up, and the whack and the thwap and the thwip, and so for me, that's probably the most, let's literally take a comic book and let you play it.
I'm going to hit you with something very deep, like a deep cut, we'll call it. The closest comic book to video game, even though it's not an IP, is Comic Zone. If you ever played that on the Sega Genesis.
I was just thinking about that.
Yeah. Comic Zone. That is playing through a comic book.
Yeah.
And that blew my mind when I was young. It was one of my best friends had that game, and I was just like, I had a Super Nintendo. He had a Sega Genesis. I played it over there. I was like, whoa. And that's I think one of the best comic book based, even though it's not an IP. It's really good.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So that leads us into our next question, which is going to be, I'm going to ask both you guys this: what makes a good comic book based video game? I'll let Wes go first.
Sure. For me, what makes a great comic book based video game is the sense of wish fulfillment. The whole reason that you're playing that is because you want to feel like the hero, whether that's, the Spider-Man game, you will feel like Spider-Man, or in a game like Marvel Ultimate Alliance, where you can, find your favorite character or cast of characters and throw them together on a team. You want to be able to kind of reenact what you've seen in the comic books throughout your years reading them. Additionally, the feeling of feeling powerful is obviously the other side of it. You want to utilize whatever superhuman qualities or superpowers that a hero has. So, for me, those are the two things that you absolutely must have to have a successful comic book video game. Is got to feel powerful, and you have to be given powers that you can use.
Agreed. Juan?
Yeah, I think it's like what he's saying, that wish fulfillment. I think as long as it's true to the core story, and I not true, but it hands it to you, and so you can play with it. It's a sandbox. I'm just remembering the Incredible Hulk. I think it was the movie tie-in video game for, I want to say it was like PlayStation 2 or something like that. And
Correct.
Just the fact that you can run around with it, crunch the car, it turns into fists. You can use those and you can wreck stuff and everything else. It's one of those things where it gives you that empowerment and feel. The recent Spider-Man, it just got it perfectly. The Batman Arkham series, you felt like, there were so many times where I just felt like, okay, I'm just going to stand on this roof and be cool, and just, I'm just going to be here with a cape and look over Gotham City. I just want to do that, or call the car and get into it, or go to different place. That feeling of it, and that's when I think a game, no matter what adaptation it's doing, really serves the material it comes from. That it hands it to you, and you're like, oh man, I feel it. I'm there. I'm in it. That to me is the best.
Okay, I definitely agree with both you guys, and there are a number of different games out there that I can throw as examples too. Like one games that people don't talk about. If you ever played Captain America, I think it's called was it the First Avenger? But it was the Captain America MCU adaptation for Xbox 360 and PS3. That was another one. And actually, most people were like, whoa, this is Captain America? Yeah. So there are a lot of great games out there that definitely do that, that make you feel like that character. And then there are ones like the Superman games, which don't make you feel like Superman.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, I recall the Nintendo 64 Superman game.
Yeah.
You didn't feel like Superman because you spent your entire game flying through rings for
Yep.
whatever reason. It had, you didn't get to stop bad guys. You didn't get to fight villains. It was just a lot of flying around a box.
Because
Yeah.
we could go on an entire tangent of bad superhero video games.
It's true.
Oh yeah. And that was the thing too, because I thought the Superman game, I thought it was originally, their whole thing was that you weren't going to have like hit points or something like that. The whole thing is you have to protect Metropolis.
That was the Superman Returns game that came
Okay.
out later on for,
And I thought that was a
movie.
cool concept. I was like,
Yeah.
oh wow, because you're Superman, so who's gonna hurt you? You can't do that. But then the idea, like, now you have to protect the city and you got to run around and do it. I'm like, oh, that is really cool. I thought that would have been a good, but I never played either game. I mean,
I did, and it just, the execution, it was a good idea. The execution could have been better. Felt rushed.
I used to love like when they did these GTA kind of adaptations, these mods that they would do, and I would see these guys do Ghost Rider mods, or they would do Flash mods, and one guy did the Flash perfectly, like you're running up the buildings, you're jumping over this thing and going really fast. I'm like, okay, there you go, there you have the game. Somebody get on this, get on Unreal Engine and write that.
If you've ever played DC Universe Online, originally for the PS3 and PC, but now it's on pretty much everything, you can do that. You can create your own character. They have flashes where he can run up buildings. You can fly. You can have the Green Lantern powers, well, whatever lantern color you want, super speed, super strength. And that, even though the writing isn't really there, it gives you that feel to become a superhero, unlike any other superhero MMORPG that's out there. But that's another story, but that's a great one too. So from there, we're going to jump into our third question. What's different about video game storytelling? So if you need me to clarify that a little more, otherwise go ahead.
No, I can jump in on this one.
Okay.
So the main way that video game storytelling is different than just reading a comic book or reading a book is because there's an interactive element that has to be accounted for. You're throwing the player into the driver's seat, so they have to affect the game through their actions. They have to what they do and who they fight and who they choose to fight, and whether they win or lose, that all affects the story and the outcome of the game. So it's more of an interactive medium. You're not just giving the story to somebody and having them reading it. You're making sure that they play an integral role and have the agency to be able to go from usually in a weakened state when they start to becoming more and more powerful until by the end of the game they are the best version of that particular hero.
Well put. Juan, do you have anything to add to that one?
Well, first, especially with the beginning of it. I mean, I don't know how many times I've played Spider-Man, and it's like, oh, I am a horrible Spider-Man. Like this is like Batman would never have fallen like or died as fast as I've been playing him. But I think it's a cinematic experience too. It's something that there's a back and forth when you do a comic. You have to turn a page. You're shifting your eyes to get to that next moment. Here you have the camera being controlled for you. You have it being shown to you. You have it being given to you. So it's a different cinematic almost experience, if not totally cinematic experience, with the sound and everything else on there. So it has motion, as sound. It has like a different thing. That's why you'll have that moments where most fans have a cringy thing. And they'll be like, oh, I never thought it sounded like that. Or I didn't think, when we read the comic book and Spider-Man goes thwip, the sound in our head is so many different types of thwips.
Yep.
And so when you finally assign it, which is such a pressure for anybody making a video game based on a thing, is like, did you get the thwip right? Is it thwip or is it thwap?
We're going to touch on just that topic later on. So keep that in mind. So, with that being said, I think you guys explained that very well. We're going to go back and touch on some of the games that we've already spoken about that you guys mentioned. what do you think about the stories in, say, some of the favorite games? You've already mentioned Juan, Injustice, and Wes, you mentioned Marvel Ultimate Alliance. What do you think about the stories in those games? Not those, just those, but in the games that you find that were your favorites. What do you think those stories, how they really impacted the gameplay or overall, or even yourselves?
Well, I will say for Injustice, that was one of the things where we're presented with a totally other DC world, you know,
Hmm.
and so we knew DC, we have a clear mindset, and all of a sudden you got a Superman that's willing to kill Batman that and siding with enemies he would never side with, just this overall world that you jump into, and they kind of threw you in it because at first you think, oh, like anybody, you go, oh, there's a money grab, get Superman and Batman and have all the DC characters, they're gonna fight. It's a fighting game. We had a Super Nintendo fighting game for Justice League, meh. But now we found out there was
I've
a
got
whole
that game.
story behind that. Yeah, of course you would have that game. Uh, but there was a sort of storyline around it, and when they actually introduced it in the comic books, it made me interested. I'm a Marvel guy. I'm not even a DC guy, and I read those issues because it was
Yeah.
interesting to see a different set of just thinking, a different set of approach, everything to the DC universe, and it caused it to have a nice dialogue that I've never seen before. And I got invested. I got very vested, and I wanted to know all the nuances, see every cut, everything I could get from that. So it worked beautifully like
And then they added the Ninja Turtles into the second one.
that. I know,
That
right?
was great.
Yeah.
Wes, what's your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, some stories are good, some stories are bad. Obviously, at the end of the day, you have very simple stories in most comic book video games where your villain is introduced at the beginning and you pursue that villain and ultimately defeat that villain. Um,
Every Ninja Turtles game.
every Ninja Turtles game, yeah, and especially think back to the arcade. I mean,
Mhm.
what's the goal of the X-Men arcade game? To stop Magneto from destroying the world. What's
Mhm.
the point of the Turtles video games? To stop Shredder from destroying the world. It was very simple back then. Nowadays, it's a little bit more. It's a little bit more difficult, in my opinion, because not only do you have to have a main villain who resonates, but you also, a lot of times, they have to kind of shoe in other villains that you encounter along the way. So as a player, you want to see the people that you recognize. You want to fight your favorite bad guy. But sometimes the story can suffer because of that, because they're trying to stuff too many things in them, too many elements. For me, when I think about like what was just a really good story, it comes back to the most recent Spider-Man games. Simply because they used villains who were kind of like sea level to start,
Mhm.
villains that people didn't necessarily know or weren't familiar with. So there was a lot of opportunity to world build and introduce that character and make them menacing and make them interesting, and still be able to encounter some of those other villains along the way. And then obviously that game obviously had a big twist at the end for as far as what happens to Peter Parker's loved ones. So to see that people don't feel necessarily beholden nowadays to a particular comic book storyline or to the movie universe, and can kind of make their own universe and have their own kind of self-contained stories and take chances and take risks. That's more interesting to me, because I don't necessarily want to play the same Spider-Man story that I've read in the comics year after year after year. I want something new. I want a fresh experience.
I completely agree on that. Both you guys mentioned something that had me think, and maybe you guys might want to piggyback on this. But when you play a video game and they decide to shoehorn in whatever's popular at the moment, like the Marvel games, when they like to tie in whatever the big Marvel movie is right now, like Ultimate Alliance made sure you did the Infinity Stones. And then I feel that sometimes that can hinder the story because they're trying to stick too close to what the movie's done and not give you a good story, or stray too far away from the comic to get too many people into it instead of focusing on a good story that really sticks to their I guess you could say the source material. So what do you guys think about that? Do you have any opinions on when they try to shoehorn something in like that?
I mean, obviously, there's a struggle there between the folks who are the developers who are making the game, and then whatever mandate they may have from the publisher, or from Marvel or from
Mhm.
DC. Who knows what's going on behind the scenes that that has to tie into a marketing, aspect, or, if a game is a movie tie-in, then it has to come out, close to the movie release itself within a couple months, if not before. And, games can greatly suffer because of that rushed development, or those corporate decisions that, make sure that Venom has to be in every single Spider-Man game.
Right.
It gets a little tiresome, but I understand at the same time. It's got to sell the toys, got to sell the comics, got to sell, this and that, got to sell the T-shirts and the bed sheets and everything.
Agreed.
Juan? Yeah, we're lucky we're not eating Pizza Hut pizza out of a Captain America shield. I mean,
that would be cool.
Just like, here you go, guys. Since we have fought that battle, I think we're hungry.
Batman Little Caesars. There was Batman Little Caesars.
And that and the thing is, it works because we celebrate that, and we'll get on board. It's just going to be a matter of time.
You ate it, didn't you, Juan? You had the Batman Little Caesars.
I mean, it's just I think it's just a Cazzoli or something like that. I don't know what it was.
Yeah,
but I ate it. I mean, why not? I'm like, okay, bring me a Superman one. I need a Wonder Woman one, and do the whole thing. I want to do the whole Justice League in a week, and just have horrible stomach ache after that. But there were some games, like I remember The Darkness. It was an adaptation from Witchblade. Yeah, it's a great game. Now, really, the story kind of stupid, but the comic, it's kind of stupid. Like, it's supposed to be.
They were fun. I enjoyed it.
It was fun. It's fun, but it's not Shakespeare. Obviously, it's not Shakespeare, and that's what we want. Mafia guy with powers, and he do demon stuff, and he comes at you. That's what we wanted. And I always said, I remember playing with a friend of mine, he was a non-comic book friend, big video game guy, but non-comic book guy. And he was playing it, and he's like, dude, this story is I'm like, it's a direct adaptation from the comic book. But he got into it. He ended up reading The Darkness, afterwards. He's like, actually, I want to read the book. And I got him a graphic novel for it. So, I mean, some things need to feed into that. But yeah, I don't think it's too far. I'm surprised in video games we don't see like a big, domino sign going across, or, everybody getting in a Nissan Elantra to go fight Thanos.
Well, that's going to be happening soon, but that's
a
different podcast. But yes, that actually will be happening soon.
I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet. I mean, it's amazing that we staved it off this long. So,
thank you guys so much for answering these questions for me and for everybody else. We really enjoyed this time. So that is the end of part 1. We will have part 2. And again, we will still continue with Wes and Juan. Thank you guys so much.
Welcome to Red Bandana Gaming, the channel where Logan will show you everything from gameplay to gear. Their crew is here to take you on a journey through every atmosphere. Releases to news, you don't have to choose. Red Bandana Gaming is here for you.
Thank you, everybody. And we are back with part 2. And part 2, we are still with Wes and Juan. And here we are going to talk about characterization. So characterization between comic books and games, and how they coexist and work together and all that other good stuff. So like I said, we're back with Juan and Wes. How you guys doing?
Good.
What's going on, man?
All righty. Thank you. So I'm okay. I'm glad you guys are good. So we're going to start with the first question. This one is going to be directed at Juan. What are some of the strategies that comic writers use to convey the goals of a character? Extrinsic or intrinsic? It's up to you, however you want.
I think when it comes to anything like that, like it comes to writing, it's any writer's same kind of basis. You got to say, okay, what does the character want? Anybody there, the classic thing to say is that everybody needs to want something in the story, even if it's a glass of water. So a lot of times you just got to find the motives for any character and present them in some kind of way. But yeah, I think that's mostly the strategy to kind of do that. If it's not body language, it's not the way the character talks, the way the character infers to somebody. You're dealing with a static medium, so it's kind of hard where you can have sometimes, like let's say in a TV show or a movie or even a video game, you can have a little jump cut to another character whose eyebrow goes up when somebody says something. And you can do that in comics too, but sometimes the person's reading a static thing and be like, well, what was that about? So you have to make that payoff later on. So I think those kind of mechanics work in any form that you do, and especially when it comes to motives for characters.
Yeah, I agree with 100%. You know, as readers or players, as the case may be, you have to understand what's driving that character and what's going to get them out the door to start their story. You know, how they're going to grow and what sort of trials they're going to go through, and eventually come out of it as a stronger, better, you know, human and or alien, depending on what your story is about. But if they don't have a clear goal, then why are we as readers going to care about them? Why do we want to be part of this journey?
When I was a kid, I remember Double Dragon when they started the game.
Right.
You know, I was a little kid, so I didn't understand. Like, why is this guy just suddenly come out and punch a woman in the stomach and walk away with her? And then you start the game. I didn't know, and everyone had to explain to me like that's his girlfriend. You're supposed to get your girlfriend back. I'm like, oh, I just thought it was a random woman getting punched in the video game. I'm like, why would you do this? It's like, all right. I was like, well, those crazy Japanese. I'm just gonna keep playing. I'll chalk it up to cultural differences.
You know what's funny? I never thought about when I was a kid. I played Double Dragon 2, Double Dragon quite a bit, mainly Double Dragon 2, and they all start the same.
Yeah.
And I never thought, I was like, all right, I need to save her. They just hurt her. I need to save her. I didn't think about until later. I'm like, hey, that's my woman kind of thing. Let me go as Billy or Jimmy, you know? That's yeah. That's kind of funny that you say that, but yeah, you're right. So one of the things I can say personally, as I'm not a writer whatsoever. So all this has been what you guys, all these questions I have for you are going to be very educational to me as well. I make pretty pictures, I draw, I animate, I model. So with you guys having this writing experience, it's very interesting. I really enjoy hearing this, and I hope all of our viewers are enjoying this too. So the next question is going to go for both of you, and it's a twofer, we can call it. How do character goals and tactics evolve from the page to the screen? As writers, do you see the characters evolve on screen in the game the same or differently as they do on the pages? Let's start with Wes on this one.
Yeah, that's a loaded question, and if I don't answer, you know, appropriately, please let me know. You know, I guess for me it's two very different answers, because in a comic book, a character is going to kind of grow and change and reach their goals over the course of potentially like many issues. You know, if you're looking at superhero comics, then they're going to pursue their goals and develop as a character over thousands of issues, and, you know, 30 years, 40 years, 60 years. Whereas like in a video game, you have to do everything in a very self-contained experience. You know, maybe that's 5 hours, 10 hours, 20 hours, 30 hours. But you are going to spend less time with the character in a game than you are potentially with a book or a comic book. So you have to keep the momentum going. You have to get from point A to point B to point Z in a nice, and wrap everything up in a nice little bow, so that somebody can eventually stop playing the game and walk away and resume their life.
And I would dare say that you know, some writers should do that in comics too. Sometimes we see that in comics we have the same Peter Parker as always being regressing, you know, back to being a teenager, back to being poor, back to being, and so sometimes we go back to those stories because that's what people are wanting. But this is a very hard question to answer because there's so many things that can happen. I know, since I'm a writer and an artist, sometimes as I'm making the comic and I already did the script for myself and I laid it out and I'm drawing it, things will trickle in, and all of a sudden I want to change a person's a response. I want to change something because I see some, you know, either really because you have a potential to do the story a little bit better as you go, or when I've worked with an artist and I'm just a writer and I see something and they pick up on something I had no idea about, and they would just say, all right, I'm going to draw a B character in the background, but they're going to be scared, or this guy is going to, I'll be like, oh, why did you draw him a little angry here? It looks like he's going to about to hit the other protagonist or something. well, I took it as this and this when you wrote this dialogue. I'm like, wow, I didn't notice that was happening. It's kind of like the same as if you were on a movie set and you're working with an actor and the actor says, well, I feel the character wouldn't do that. It would do this. Or I would feel I would shout this part, but whisper this part. And I think that's something that's a process. I don't think maybe it's possible in video games. I think everything has to be nailed down in the development process really tightly. Wes, you probably know more than I do that way more tightly to do, because you're not messing around. You have to, like you said, you have your other end goal. You got to get this done and get it out the door.
Yeah, that you bring up a great point, Juan. In comics, you do have that flexibility where you can go and you can change things. The artist can make edits to their art. The writer can make edits to their script, and you can kind of, as a collaborative team, mine those emotional moments to make it the best and most impactful that it can be. Whereas in a video game, you're absolutely right. You nail down your art assets years and years before the game comes out, and it's very difficult and sometimes very expensive to change those things once you're so far in the pipeline that you have to just live with the terrible decisions that you made. Or if you see an opportunity like, hey, we could change that and we could really we could bring more of the theme of the game to light, for the player. You kind of have to make that decision of, well, is that something that we pursue and then we get behind schedule, or do we just say, well, unfortunately we saw this too late, let's keep going forward. So there's very difficult decisions like that. So two very different artistic mediums where one where editing can be easy and one where editing is not so easy. But on that same token, you think about indie comics, where if you're just doing that on your own, and you really don't have the pressure of necessarily a publication deadline if you're just working on issues or working on a small series. Whereas, mainstream comic books, they have monthly deadlines that they have to hit. So it's like, even then, you may see something you could have done to make your story even better, but you're at that point, you're coming close to your deadline. The script has to go to the artist, the art has to go to the colorist. So it's like, you can't always pursue those opportunities. And those are what we try to learn from as creatives and as writers and artists as well, as how can we make sure that we don't miss this the next time.
Yep.
So one thing, it's kind of interesting that, Juan, that you mentioned something about in a comic book, how the writer or the artist will put something in the background or something here and there. Most people don't realize that. As someone who's been playing games for a while, and just basically touching on what Wes said, how a lot of the assets are done so far ahead of time and sometimes adjusted for the story. I've noticed the only way they can do that in video games, like what they do in comics, like Juan suggested, is when they add Easter eggs. And Easter eggs are a big thing in video games. They don't always advance the story, but they can be like little treats for someone who is a fan of the source material. Like in the Spider-Man games, say you're swinging around, you'll see some graffiti that says something that throws back to a Spider-Man issue. So that's the only way you can really get that in video games. But you get a little bit about that like you would in comics, but not so much. And yeah, I can see how you can do that on the fly. But just a little. It's just not the same. But it's still fun.
That used to be my big argument sometimes with the few game developers I knew or other writers in the industry, and I would be like, well, how come it can't be? Like, I would be like, oh, if there's a Spider-Man game, it'll be cool. Is like every time there's a downloadable content, you can run through this issue of Spider-Man. And let's say this issue of Spider-Man, he fights the Rhino, he has to do this. And it's like, how cool would that be? And they would just look at me like, you don't know the process.
Yeah.
Like, you don't know how much that would take,
Yeah.
But I'm like, but it would be cool. That's my argument back to them is, it would be cool. And you see that, and there's only so much. And going back to what you're saying, the interactivity is the other thing, because I remember playing this last Avengers game, the one with Miss Marvel. That was loaded with Easter eggs. And when I was playing that, just messing around and walking around, I was like, that's from issue so and so, and that from issue that, and that was from this thing. And seeing that's
the Easter eggs were better than the game.
I know.
The game was awful.
I didn't want to say it. You said it.
I can say it. I said it on my channel, and that's completely fine. But if you like that and you want to play a good one, try out the Guardians of the Galaxy one if you haven't. That's got Easter eggs up the wazoo. And
I haven't tried it, but I saw a lot of it, and I think it's very, very, again, something that serves the actual core story. In other words, you have these group of characters, you can use them
Fan
interactively.
service up the wazoo. They even have posters of Dazzler. When was the last time we saw Dazzler? It's 80s Dazzler. So if you read X-Men back in the day, you know who she is.
Yeah.
So, or played the arcade game. She is in the arcade game. So that one we've gone a little long. That was some great answers, guys. I really appreciate that one. So the next one, again, is directed towards both you guys. Does characterization matter more in games or in comics? Wes.
I would argue that characterization is more important in comic books simply because you're potentially spending more time with those characters. It's a serialized format. So you have to not only develop the character over each issue, but you're giving your reader a cliffhanger to bring them back the next issue. And you should, as a reader, you should care about what's going to happen to them, even despite the fact that that they're going to defeat the bad guy and everything. They're going to save the world. You want to know how that's going to play out. So you have to know what's personally at stake for that hero. That's what's going to drive the narrative forward over that mini series or that particular event. Whereas in a video game, you can have a good game and not have necessarily a good character. The thing that I think about is there are a lot of video games that are based, they're not necessarily comic book adaptations, but they're very much based around the familiarities of comic books as far as like you are a hero. Like I'm thinking of like the infamous games, if you're familiar with those titles, where it's basically a superhero game, but the superhero is not somebody that is in the mainstream or is owned by Prototype's another one. And my problem with those games, I played a few of them, was just like I just never cared about the main character. Like I didn't find them likable. I didn't find them interesting. I didn't connect to whatever particular struggle that they had.
The fact that you mentioned Infamous Second Son, I felt like that. It didn't strike me enough. I didn't care about the character.
Right. But you can still have that in a video game as long as the gameplay experience is fun, because at the end of the day, running around and shooting people with electricity powers is fun and should be fun. So as long as the core gameplay loop, keeps somebody engaged and keeps them moving forward and provides them a challenge and excitement and the adrenaline rush that they are looking for in a video game that will get them through that 10, 20, 30 hour experience, you can get away with having a protagonist who maybe doesn't develop as much as you might like them to. It would never work in a film or a comic book, because you would say, I don't care about this person, and you leave the movie theater, you throw the comic away and never buy another issue. But the world of video games seems to be more forgiving toward that.
Agreed. Juan?
I'm still waiting for an Aunt May mode in Spider-Man where I can just play
Which
Aunt May.
Aunt May?
That's the thing. See, characterization. You'd have to have. I agree with Wes totally. I think it's one of those things where I guess it's more fluid in video games than it is in comics, because you'll see people be very upset when a character is not a character in comics, especially in a traditional sense. It was one of those things, like in the comic shop, one of the things I had to fight with people was Superman, son of Kal-El, his son is bisexual. And they brought that up, and it was like, and a lot of people, and I would ask them, like, when's the last time you read a Superman comic? And crickets. They wouldn't. Then I read it for a while. Then I handed it to him. It's maybe a 2 or 3 panels, something like, talking to his boyfriend, this and this and that. And then he goes back and does the cool Superman stuff. And all of a sudden, that characterization doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't matter to them what it is. It's still a great book. And they like the character even more now. And now it's one of our more subscribed to comics. In that kind of sense, sometimes you got to shake it up. And sometimes you got to be very traditional. I think in video games, you can be fluid. And again, I want my Aunt May mode. Or Alfred mode. Can I be Alfred in Batman?
There we go.
And I got to make the tea. You got to shine the Batmobile.
Yeah, you got to stitch up Bruce. Yeah,
exactly. The Mashiatsu massage.
Well, again, and you raise another interesting point there, which is like with video games, people tend to follow more franchises than necessarily characters. So people will buy every Call of Duty game that comes out every year because they like the experience. They're not in it for the main character, whoever that may be on a particular game. Whereas in the world of comics, People follow the characters that they love. They go and they see the movies of the characters that they love because they have a personal attachment to that character, or they see themselves in that character. So I would argue that comic books, probably more than any other medium, have the richest characterization that you'll find in any format of storytelling.
But isn't that also the problem with like video games sometimes, that's when they adapt something, people get I would look at the recent Halo series.
Mm-hmm.
I was a fan of Halo from back in the day. See, he's already curling up to die.
Are we talking about? Let's not talk about that TV show. That's wrong.
Okay. Well, that's what I'm saying. All I've heard, I'm not the
No.
biggest Halo fan. I played the first ones. I played a couple of other ones, but my partner here at the comic shop, he's a huge fan of Halo.
I'm a massive Halo guy.
And he hated
Wrong.
the series. He hated the series. And I always go back to that thing of like, there's this fluidity that happens with comics, and when you nail it down, it's kind of like almost like what happens with novels, because then like when you read a novel, you have the character in your head, you have his voice in their head, how they sound like, how they walk, how the city looks, how this, and then when they finally decide to nail it down and say, here's the movie, here's the character, either you go yeah or you go
Mm-hmm.
like where it works is like Patrick Stewart being Professor X. Like no one can argue that. Everybody says
perfect.
Yeah, everybody since 1990 whatever, since it was Wizard magazine as an idea, we went yes, perfect. We have no
we
problems
talked
with
about that as kids, yeah.
But then we look at say Apocalypse and the Age of and X-Men. There you go. And that was Oscar Isaac, who's come on, he's a fan favorite. We all like the guy, but when that happened, we went, what is this? So it's like a weird situation where I think video games are kind of caught in that too, where you take a character that's so fluid that you know about, that you like, you expect from, and then when they nail it down and say, okay, this is it in a movie, we all go up in arms.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I'm going to have to agree and sort of disagree, where I could see, for example, let me give you a little backstory on how I feel. I'm very conservative when it comes to my superheroes. You don't mess with Superman. You don't mess with Captain America. You don't mess with Peter Parker Spider-Man, because those companies have made those characters certain ways, and that's what we've grown to enjoy. I believe if you're going to change the characterization, do like Marvel did, where they brought out Miles Morales, or like you said with Superman's son, make it a different character. Don't mess with the original. And if video games would do the same thing, the thing is, you don't dive as deep in a video game characterization. Like you guys said, I completely agree, because you're more about the gameplay than you are about the story, unless you're playing an RPG. But RPGs almost never run on an existing IP like Superman or Batman or anything like that. That almost never happens. So when you stick with a character, this is what we've known for 40 years, the 50 years. This is what people love. You don't change it just for the sake of change when you're in a video game or a movie, or to just appease an audience that doesn't even care about your character. I'm one of those, that characterization that you've built over the last, I don't know how many decades, is very important to me. And again, like the Superman games, they're so bad because that's not Superman. He doesn't fly through rings. Superman, just doesn't go, all right, I've lost, and give up. That's not Superman. And so I agree with the characterization in comic books, because you do have that serialization. And this is something I can go on as more of a reader than I'm definitely not a writer. And as an artist, I see these things and I see these changes. And as a gamer, I see these changes. And sometimes it's good, but most of the time, it can be questionable. So, but I really classify the characterization. So the next question, in video games, characters can be voice acted, unlike comics. See, this is where we get back to the first episode. Do you think that takes away from the characterization that comics create on the pages? Before I let you guys answer, I'm going to say yes.
Well, I think
read a book, you get a sound in your head, and then video games or movies or animation will change it. What do you guys think? Let's start with you, Juan.
No, I always say, again, that nailing down. As soon as you nail it down, it's like, and it could be a great decision or an awesome decision. I mean, again, going back to the Arkham, they get Kevin Conroy to do the voice. Nobody argued that. Nobody went
The animated series, but before the animated series, did anybody have a sound of what Batman sounded like? Adam West.
I think in the desert world of the comics age back then, when we barely had any cartoons, we didn't have anything. We were happy to have anything, you know. So it's like as long as he wasn't Adam West, we were all happy. You know, Michael Keaton, that would be fine. I mean, that kind of thing. So we were like anything would come and everything. So I think in that sense, it delivers. After that, it's hard. I mean, I'm a huge Transformers fan. If it's not Peter Cullen doing Optimus Prime,
is wrong.
I don't want it. Yeah. I don't want it. You're hurting me. You're hurting my feelings. I want to go home. I don't want to be around, you know. And why? Because I'm this traditional fan, and we have to make way for that. So I think it's a big thing. It's a big thing.
Wes?
Yeah, and I feel like we just kind of touched on this with the last question a lot, as far as are people more accepting to changes in that type of thing? And no comic book movie and no comic book video game can ever possibly live up to everyone's expectations. Everybody has their own expectations that they bring to it, and every time we get an amazing Marvel movie, there are those people who go, that wasn't my version of the character. So you can't always win, but in video games, I find myself not necessarily minding. I think, again, let's reference the latest Spider-Man games, the voice actors who played Peter Parker and Miles Morales. Like, that was fine. Like, I thought they did a great job. They conveyed the emotion of the story. If I think about like who my Peter Parker voice is, then it's like the guy from the 90s cartoon. That's kind of what I grew up on. But it doesn't bother me if somebody else comes along and plays that character. I think that if we can suspend our disbelief in reading comics that there's like the multiverse and all these things, then yes, we should absolutely be okay with different people voicing these characters and giving their different takes on them.
Yeah, like I said, I can see where you guys are coming from, but growing up the way I did, like, for example, we'll go to Marvel movies. X-Men will always be, if you look at the X-Men, Hugh Jackman will always be my Wolverine, because he's always been that one. So whenever they bring someone else in, and I think who is it that did the voice in the cartoon? Was it Frank Tastacore? I'm not 100% sure on that.
No.
I know he did it in some of the animated, but the guy who did the voice work for the 90s X-Men Wolverine, that's the voice that everybody has. And if you ever try to go back and watch the old one, like Pride of the X-Men, that's a deep one. That he was Australian and had a weird voice. It was like, that ain't right. And then when you hear him in some of the other video games, like, that ain't right. So what I've noticed is a lot of the new mediums that have Wolverine in it, they try to stick with a voice actor that sounds very similar to that 90s X-Men, that cartoon, because that's what people have grown up with. And they do the same thing with Batman. They just need to make him sound a certain way, because people will go, well, that ain't right. But then you got characters like, say, Green Lantern. We had Hal Jordan. Does it matter? We had Ryan Reynolds, and no one goes, oh, he doesn't sound right, because it's how many different variations have we had? Sure. So
it just depends on the character too, because there's some characters like Hal Jordan's a boring character. I mean, as much as he's a cool Air Force, he's an Air Force pilot, but he's cut out. He's just like, oh, okay, I'm an Air Force pilot. I got the ring. I'm gonna be a hero. Blah blah blah. They've done a lot since then. Emerald Dawn, all these other storylines that
Blackest Night really did a thing for him.
Blackest Night and everything else. But we just kind of went, oh, okay. He's just the classic leading man kind of character. Again, compared to Peter Parker, kind of like Jinkies, guys. I'm kind of a nerd and I got spider powers.
Did you just say Jinkies?
It's Jinkies, guys.
I'm gonna leave that in. I'm gonna Jinkies.
So I mean, I think that's and that's where, when you see a creative team or a director or somebody has a vision and they bring something to it and they want to bring that out. We all remember the 90s X-Men. I know so many female customers who identify and love Rogue from that run. And so anybody that's not that, they're kind of like, nah, I don't want to deal with it. If she's not going, hey, sugar, they don't dig it. They don't want it. So I hopefully these are the kind of meetings they're having at Disney or at Warner Brothers or any of these companies when they're deciding to going forward with a character and understanding that history and what they recognize as the character, no matter how minor they are.
Yeah, once I agree. Once a character is established, that characterization within that character, not redundant, is established, people gravitate towards that version of that character. And then once you try to change it, people go, "Whoa, no, that ain't right." So, and that's one of my big things with Captain America. I'm a huge Captain America fan, and the way they've really just spit on him in the comic books lately, I'm like, that's not Captain America. That's not the last 80 years of Captain America. That's just not right. So I can definitely see how characterization builds, especially when you have so much rich history. So we've talked about that one quite a bit. Okay, so that was a very good one. Next one is, do you think a game can portray a character as well as a comic book can? We're going to start with Juan on this one, and then Wes, after he finishes up, if you have anything to add, you can.
Sure.
Again, I think in either way, it's different mediums. I think that when we're talking about characterization, a game could portray a character, again, the voice, the way they talk, if it's also the person's first exposure to the character, and which might well be. Sometimes the video game, the movie is the gateway drug to the comic book, and so a lot of times they're going to be characters or people that will first experience somebody like Spider-Man through a medium like that. So yeah, I think that's going to be where they're going to get that, again, when you're reading a comic, the voice in your head, the sound of the spider sense when it goes off, it goes off in my head sometimes, talking about the 90s cartoon, when that happens, I'm always waiting for the like little sound.
Well, if you ever played Spider-Man X-Men Arcade's Revenge, the video game, the spider sense is like you're getting electrocuted. So sadly, that's what goes off in my head.
And so it's always so yeah, it can totally cut the character out for you till later on, just like say like Iron Man. Like sometimes people look at Iron Man, slick character, really cool, and then I show him the demon in a bottle storyline and be like, oh, he was an alcoholic and he was a piece of crap and he accidentally killed a guy because he was drunk in the suit.
And see, in the movies, they never even touched on his when he was a paraplegic.
Oh, I think they didn't touch on the alcoholism or anything, because I would dare say it's probably Robert Downey Jr. didn't want to do that because of his own past with what happened with alcoholism. And I could imagine him just having in like one meeting just saying, let's not go that way. And I respect that. I can understand that.
And then I think you don't have enough movie in order to fit something like that into it, especially with what they were building. But it leads right into what we're talking about.
Yeah, I guess the only thing that I would really add to that is, I don't think that the older games, could necessarily pull off good characterization. You think back to those arcade games that we've been talking about that we love. If that was your first exposure to, say, the X-Men, like, you would know, oh, this guy has claws and this guy, his skin can turn into steel, but you don't really glean anything about the characters from playing the game at all. Whereas now, we're kind of in a time, in a renaissance of narrative-based gaming where people want have a good story alongside their action and adventure. So I feel like nowadays in Spider-Man and the Guardians game and maybe the Avengers game, they've shown us that the character is more and more important, and they want to represent those characters pretty close to how they are in the comic, or are a variation of them. So I think nowadays we're getting to that point where we can show those characters just as strongly as a comic book can.
Yeah, that actually made me think, because with what you said, it's more along the lines back in the day, hardware limitation, limited story, limited characters, limited everything you could really tell in a game, where nowadays the hardware is just, it allows you to do everything. So I would say even within the last 20 years, going back to that GameCube PS2 era, is when, like you said, the Spider-Man games the movie based ones, or Ultimate Spider-Man really started, or X-Men Ultimate Alliance, or the Ultimate Alliance games and so on, where they all started, and that story really picked up. And nowadays, the writers can just feel free to do whatever they want because the hardware can definitely match it.
And it's also just a function of time more than anything. Think about the arcade generation was the companies needed to keep putting out machines in order to keep, pulling in the quarters. So they were putting out new games every 6 months or so. And now video game studios are spending, upwards of like 5 years working on some of these very cinematic experiences. So, the fact that they can take that time and put that love and that care and really, dig into these stories, and they hire writers' rooms now. That's something that was, most games back in the day were just written by whoever was designing them. Like, oh, writing's not hard, I can do this. And nowadays they're leaning into, okay, you have a specialty, let's lean into that. Let's really map this out so we know exactly where we're going and kind of develop around it.
Yeah, I mean, that's how we got a plumber stepping on turtles.
Right.
To save a princess in a mushroom kingdom. I mean,
sure.
That was one guy. You left him alone with the typewriter.
Yep.
But yeah, no, and if you look at just again, being so interactive, the player itself can decide if they want to take that deep dive within the game too. Because I liked going through, again, in the Arkham Asylum games, being able to like go through the files and grab all the different things. Spider-Man, what was the challenge that you had to take a certain amount of pictures? It was like 100 different spots in New York City,
right?
And you had to take the pictures, and like that was another one, because then you could see the Sanctum Sanctorum of Doctor Strange, or you could see those kind of little tidbits feed into it. So now you have the capability of just diving in if you want to. Also, it's not like when you read a comic book where you have to like kind of read it, and even they give you that little blurb. Oh, this happened in issue 186. True believer. And then you gotta like, oh man, now I gotta look for 186. I gotta find it now. It's different with a video game.
Awesome. Appreciate those answers. I liked them quite a bit. Hopefully everybody else did. Now we are going to skip on to our last question, which is going to be for both of you guys right off the bat. In your personal opinions, can a game based on a comic book character ever do justice to the comic book source? If so, can you name a few examples? I would say yes, but I want to know what you guys come up with as examples. Either you guys can chime in whenever you want. I'm gonna let.
I feel like we've traveled through that already.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've covered this ground a little bit, and if you really want to go for the most like primitive versions of these characters, then I think the arcade games nail them, because especially I think about like the Ninja Turtle games. It's like you gleaned all of their personalities from playing that. Like you knew that Raphael was angry. You knew that Mikey just liked to have fun, and even though they only had limited technological capabilities, like it was the most distilled versions of the characters.
Right.
So I think that you can draw from source material and nail it. I think nowadays we're just in an area of interpretation where we want, these developers want to do their own version, or they want to have their own take on it that's not necessarily bumped up against anything else. We talked earlier about, Juan, you were saying that, you would like the idea of just being able to play through a specific issue of a comic book. And, I would love that too. I think that would be really cool. And while difficult from a technological standpoint, like I would love to see a Spider-Man game where, I just get a bunch of issues to pick from and I can play through the events of that. I think that would be very interesting, and it would be a good, crossover thing. Okay, you liked playing that, you might like reading it if you don't already. So yeah, I'd be absolutely down for something like that.
Yeah, I could see myself playing through like Onslaught or Age of Apocalypse with the X-Men stuff. That would be really cool stuff to play.
Oh, yeah. And I think it would just go on and on and on, because it's little things too that would bring it up. I remember when, especially in the arcade, when Marvel superheroes came out and you were able to play it, and seeing that Magneto didn't touch the ground when he came across the screen. And he kind of looked down and like, Dr. Doom just fought you with his arms folded. And it's like, you were nothing. And then boom. Yeah. That was a cool thing, because it's like, it's really, because if Dr. Doom was standing there like this, and doing Hadoukens or something, I would have been like, no, dude, like he doesn't do that. So that seeing that characterization and seeing that those kind of living up to who they were. That's like also, you know, you had the Punisher game, which, like I said, was awesome, but for some reason, player 2 was Nick Fury. And I was like, I would just go back home and be like, was Nick Fury his brother or something, or like, what was going on? Like, why? Looking through my comics, like, what does Punisher have to do with Nick Fury? And that was just somebody saying we need a player 2.
Yeah, you know what? I never really thought about that, but I remember playing it, and they put that on one of the more recent Marvel arcade one-ups, and I was like, why was he player 2?
Mm-hmm. It's a really good game, though.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
It was super fun.
Most people don't know about it.
And that's where I think, you know, one of those major differences between, like, again, comics and, say, video games, and something that can happen in comics too. If you're having enough fun, you will forgive a lot of things.
Of course.
If the game is good, you'll be like, okay, they didn't get this right. Okay, that's the wrong color. Okay, he doesn't say that. I don't mind because this is really cool. In comics, you gotta have to be on it. I mean, there's times, again, if the comic is interesting enough and it's fun, they'll let you get away with it.
Yeah, it's like if you were playing a video game or reading a book, a comic book about Wolverine, and he says buddy and not bud.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, bub. If he goes, hey, buddy, how you doing? No, you're supposed to say bub. It's not right. And you can't forgive that. You can read the whole book, no matter how good the book is. That's going to, or the game, it's going to like gnaw at you. And if Wolverine isn't saying bub and he's saying buddy, it's just not right. So, yeah, I could definitely see that. So thank you guys for that one. This will conclude part 2, the characterization. And if you guys do you have anything else you want to say before we end this episode?
No, I'm good, man.
All right, thank you guys so much. And now, hopefully, everybody out there will stay tuned for part 3, and that will be coming up really soon.
Hi, I'm George Arthur from Cybersage Video Games in Lakeland, Florida. My favorite comic book-based video game is X-Men Children of the Atom. Originally came out in the arcade, later came out for Sega Saturn and PlayStation in the 90s. Absolutely had a blast playing that game at Grand Prix Racerama with my friends. Spent a lot of quarters on it. I was the worst of everybody in my group that played it, but it was still a lot of fun. I think my fondest memory of the game was that it was so well animated. It was one of those Capcom games that first really captured many frames of animation in a game, made it look real fluid. It was a game changer, so to speak. I still play the game to this day with some friends when they come over, and really enjoy that game. And that's why I like it.
All right, thank you guys for joining us back for part 3. Part 3 is writing the script, and we are back with Wes and Juan. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the last 2 parts. Now on to this one. So we're going to start with Juan on this one, and just like before, this is directed at Juan, but if you want to jump in on at the end of it, Wes, feel free to.
Sure.
First question is, what are some of the techniques you use when writing comic book dialogue and character voice? That's why I said, Wes, you might want to jump in at the end, but go ahead, Juan.
I think mainly for me, it has to sound natural, and natural is a weird value to put onto there because you really have to solve for X, because what is the character? What is What are they looking for? What do they want? Like, we were talking about in the other part, knowing the motive of the character and then the type of character it is. I will sound it out. I mean, I look like a crazy person when I write. I will sit there talking to myself, making voices. I've done it before. I've consulted everyone from my girlfriend to my friends to my dog, and I'll be like, okay, does this sound right? I will mull it over. And my dog's a very critical person. He's a neoclassicist in his writing style. But that I will really sound it out. Does it sound right? I remember for creature in the creature bullpen, we were talking about it, and one of the writers, my partner, gave me the script, and we just went over the word shenanigans. And because a character screams, "Oh, these are shenanigans," and I'm like, who says shenanigans? And that was like the biggest argument. See what I'm saying? So that was the biggest argument for like 2 hours, because I was just like, it just doesn't sound natural. In the end, it's his book, so I said, you can put whatever you want, and you have to live and die by it. My opinion is that doesn't sound right. So that's the other thing too. Sometimes you have to follow your gut. Like I write some things that are very Miami, very Spanglish, half Spanish, half English, sometimes in Spanish. And I've had the arguments with other Spanish speakers where they would say, well, I wouldn't have said it like that, or I wouldn't use that phrase, or I wouldn't have said, so we'll, there's a tete to that, to how something sounds. But I think the main thing is that first it has to move the story forward, first and foremost. And second, it has to actually sound right to me. That's my biggest thing.
Yeah, I agree with you, Juan. Like I spend a lot of time just reading stuff aloud, just to say, like, does it roll off the tongue right? Does it sound like something that a human being would say? The other thing that I like to do is I like to try to find people to match characters to, whether that's like an actor or just somebody that I know in my own life. Like I like to pull speech patterns where I can. People talk differently depending on where they're from, like you said, like by including Spanglish inside of your dialogue. So and that can reveal a lot about character just by how they speak and things that they may reference. There's turns of phrase that my wife is from the South, so she says things differently, uses different euphemisms than I do, and I think about that. I'm like, okay, well, where does this person hail from? Do I want to insinuate that they have a Southern background? Because if so, they're going to say this way, or they're going to refer to something this way. And then above all, the thing that I try to do in any medium that I write for is, if you took away the visual element, if you were just reading the dialogue, could you tell which character is speaking simply by reading their dialogue? Do you know how Peter Parker sounds if you could see just his word balloons, or his jokes as he fights the enemy? Everybody kind of has their own speaking pattern. This should be identifiable even if you don't know who they are on the page.
No, exactly.
I actually like those answers, because I never really noticed it, because I'm not a writer. So when I draw or when I do that and I design a character, I don't think about their accent or things that they say or emphasis on certain words. But in retrospect, looking at it, I don't want everybody to sound like they're Sentinels, where they all just talk like robots, and you don't know the difference. And I think that's a very good thing to really characterize your characters. They actually give them some life, some personality, some background. I think that's really cool.
I always say that I don't want it to sound like this guy's dad in Back to the Future, like, hey, you get your gosh darn hands off. Like, it just sounds so wrong. I've had the argument where I've had an editor even say, okay, well, this is misspelled. And I'm like, no, I did it phonetically on purpose. Like, I want it to sound, so if you say y'all, why I spell it YA''LL, y'all, because I want somebody to say y'all. Like, I want it to sound it, like I wanted to hear in their head. I've had the argument too where they say, well, let's use a different font for this character speech. And I'm like, that's no, because now design wise, it looks archaic. Yeah. It looks like a kidnapping letter or something like that. So I want it to look a certain way. So I want it to read in their head, because sometimes if you do read y'all, and you might have, maybe if you're not unfamiliar with it, but if you're familiar with it, it instantly sounds in your head. So you have somebody doing that. So I think that's one of those things that you have to like really battle with. And I'll sit there and scratch my chin at one panel sometimes for 20, 30 minutes. But most of the time I'm pretty secure in what I'm doing.
Which it's perfect segue into the next question, which I think this would definitely be one for Wes. How do you think that's different when writing the script for a game?
Well, this is a whole can of worms in and of itself. So, when you're writing a comic book, the story typically, in most traditional situations, the story comes first. So, the writer writes their script, it goes to the artist, artist has input and interprets that, runs that through their creativity filter, creates the pages, they go down the assembly line, right? Whereas in a video game, usually a story is like the last thing that anybody worries about, which sounds crazy to say, and is not always the case, especially as we move into more like narrative focused games where you kind of have to have that baseline and know what you're building toward. But you'd be amazed at how many times in the video game world, the game is pretty much done. And then they need somebody to come in and basically put a story over top of what exists. Like that's actually what my first few jobs in the industry were. We're trying to reverse engineer everything that was happening into a story, which is not easy. Like when the gameplay goes from like underwater to outer space to ancient Egypt, just because it looks cool in the game, but you have to figure out like logically why does all this happen. So writing for a video game is less of a script and more of just being reactionary to everything that's happening, and then having to adjust based off of like budgets and time and an artist's ability. Like the story that I always tell was that there's a video game that I was working on that was based in like a post-apocalyptic landscape, and I was building and building and building, and at the end I wanted to have like a tank come out, and kind of like destroy a building. And I was told, well, we can't afford a tank, but we can give you a dog. And I was like, that doesn't work. That's not the same thing. So, you in video games, you have to make more sacrifices and be a little bit more flexible. So, yes, you won't necessarily see like a traditional video game script. They exist, but typically just for like something like cutscenes, where you're getting that like 30-second to 2-minute long cinematic that has to be very tightly scripted.
Okay, that statement will go right into the next one, which is this is going to be on both you guys, but I don't know how you want to answer it, but it's formatting. What do you think about formatting when it comes from comic books and then video games? So do you basically have the format from comic books? Can they be used for video games or vice versa?
The easy situation is that if there's really like you'll never see, much like there are like no two comic book scripts that look exactly alike because everybody kind of has adapted to their own format and what works for them and what allows them to just write and let the formatting kind of get out of the way. Video games are a completely different animal because aside from cutscenes, which are done in like a screenplay format, usually done in something like Final Draft, so very traditional in that sense, but then everything else is done usually like in Microsoft Excel, which sounds crazy and bonkers, but it's true. So like you're basically writing everything into cells on a spreadsheet. Like there's no sexy script at all. It's like very mechanical and mathematical.
Yeah.
So they don't translate so well.
No, and I imagine again because you have to. Neil Gaiman, when he was talking about comics, he says for every single comic book project he's done, and he has like over 100, no two have been alike. There's some that were literally thumbnail sketches and like this happens on this page, this happens on this page kind of scripts to fully realize written out almost novels of scripts that he's had the hand artists to work on. It all depends on how you want to map it for the rest of the creatives when you're writing, depending on what creatives you're working with and how they want to handle it. How much of a roadmap is it and how important is certain things? Because if you say Spider-Man swinging through the city and he gets to a rooftop and there's Black Cat and right now they could get 5 artists, say you have 3 pages, draw this, and they're all going to be different. And now, if you were to say, well, he's swinging through the city, he's thinking about his Aunt May who's sick, and he has to get into town, and he goes over to the pharmacy that he has to pick up the medicine for, but he can't because he has to meet up with it. Then now you're really articulating every little bit and piece. And artists themselves, if you leave them to it, they're gonna be like, well, I'm gonna draw the Empire State Building in the background because I want a really cool shot of him, going through the city, or I want this, or I want that. And they're going to be putting different stuff on there. So it's really about, there is this talk about, there were some people that wanted to make the official formatting for comic books, but I think that's just, it's up to you and your creative team and the creative you're working with. I think it's where your understanding is the best way.
Okay, that actually kind of leads, again, you guys have been doing good at leading into my next questions. So the next one is about scenes, because I think you kind of touched on it there without even realizing it. But what about scenes? What factors determine the length of a scene in comic books and video games? It almost sounds like you really hit the nail on the head there, Juan, without realizing it, about comic books as you're writing it. But what do you guys think about scenes in terms of comic books to video games?
Well, like for myself, I'm very about outlines. Outlines are like the biggest thing in the world, and I try to stick to it. And I 24-page comic, I will write 1 through 24, and I'll go to 1 and be like, opening with this. I'll go to 12, this is the big thing that happens, and 24, this is how it's going to end. And then I start filling in, and then that major plot thing could move to page 17, it could move up to page 8, it could be whatever, but now I have a skeleton and I start breaking it down from there. The scene has to serve the story. So whatever is there, I've had to kill my babies. I've had to have, this is a great scene when they're on the top and they're sharing a sandwich and there's a moment between these two characters and it's awesome. But I'm 8 pages over. I got to kill it. I'll try to fold it into the next issue, or I've gone and been like, I'll make it an extra thing on a web comic or something. Or like, or this will be for the graphic novel. You gotta look at it. It all depends. When I teach, I always use the same thing where it's about also like the climax of something. So I'll show like, okay, you have a guy takes a woman hostage, he's holding her by the throat, and he has Hawkeye comes out and he takes the arrow and he puts it in the bow and he shoots it into the guy's hands, and she's free. There's so many ways you can do that. You could have that could all fit on 1 page where you want to get it out fast, or you can stretch it to 6 or 7 or 8 pages where it's her face in fear and him holding her throat and maybe pressing and screaming something and then pressing the gun to her temple and Hawkeye looking and he's thinking about the shot and he's taking it out slowly and he shoots the bow and the hammer goes, and now you're building the climax. See, now you're building that tension. So that's what it needs to be there. And does it need to be 1 page or does it need to be 7 pages? Please check with your editor.
That's funny because like I actually build my outlines the exact same way that you explained, which is cool. And you should, the rule that I live by is get into a scene as late as possible and get out as early as possible. Just because people have a shorter attention span as well as time goes on, and so the more that you can, granted, if a scene needs to breathe, it should breathe. But it should also stylistically fit in with what you've been doing throughout your series or a graphic novel. So it's like, if you're not doing those 7 pages of him firing the arrow, if you haven't done that anywhere else, then it could catch your readers off guard if you suddenly put something like that in and really expand out time. So, you think of that stuff too. It's like, oh, this would be really cool. But is this, like, as Juan said, is this in service to the story? Is this cohesive with what you've done before?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's I always feel like in writing, it's like IKEA furniture. Like you want to be like loose with it, and then you tighten the bolts at the end. But everybody makes a mistake to tighten the first nut. And I'm like, and I'm like, who said you did it right, dummy? You might have done it wrong. So you keep it loose, and then at the end,
we've all done that.
Yeah. So that's one of the things I tell people, just try to be loose and then bring it together at the end, because you got to work through it. I mean, and number one thing always is editing. You have to go back and edit. You know, a lot of people just want to, I'm a genius and here you go. And no, hey, this is wrong. This is wrong. This is stupid. This doesn't make sense. Boom, back to you at it. And that's how you sharpen the blade.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we are going to hit our final question for the episode, which is, we talked about how characters change from one medium to another. What about the plot? Do games offer some flexibility that comic books don't?
Yeah, I would say yes.
I'm looking at you.
and the main reason is because in a comic book you can have a 4-issue or 5-issue miniseries that is about something personal. It's somebody's revenge story. It's somebody's them learning something about themselves or reconnecting with an old friend. Whereas in a video game, you typically want to have like very much big stakes. The world is going to end. A country is going to be exterminated. A whole planet is going to die. Like, you want to be able to save everything when you play a video game. So you can't necessarily, it would not be as interesting to spend 50 hours, doing a video game about like the trials and tribulations of trying to, mail off your taxes or something. Like it just does not make for great gameplay. Whereas, that could be very interesting if done, in the comic book medium with the right people.
Isn't that just a question of like, I guess the type of games? I mean, aren't there like romance games now that are slowly coming out? And there's, it's not all shoot 'em up, it's not all save the world, but it's that, okay, now can you woo the? And it's so funny because in comics we used to have romance comics, and that were a big deal before the actual code came around. And and you look at manga, which never had the code. That's a huge deal over there in Japan. All these shoujo and type of comic books and everything else, and it just begs the question, like if video games are going to follow that line,
And you're absolutely right.
They kind of already have. There's interactive digital novels.
Yeah, and there's a ton of stuff. If you just look at all the games that are available just on your phone, it's not all just like puzzle based free to play stuff. There's some really engaging, very short experiences. I'm a parent of a young toddler. And so, like, I don't have all the time in the world to play video games anymore. So something that takes 60 hours is almost impossible for me to get through. So I've been looking for these experiences that I can get through in like an hour or two, that I can play over just a couple nights. And so what you're saying, Juan, about like, romance games and stuff, those do exist. And they're probably, the biggest that they've ever been. So, those experiences are absolutely there if people want them. I was mainly just speaking from like the blockbuster perspective. But, I love little games like that where, you learn, you embody a character that learns something vital about themselves, or you go through the process of like a relationship that's failing with somebody. I love stuff like that because it's intimate and it's different, and it requires, your non-traditional game mechanics. What do you do in the game if you're not shooting people? And that's where it's very interesting for me.
Can Master Chief learn to love?
Can he learn to love?
No.
Never.
But thank you guys so much for that. That was awesome. So that's where we're going to end it right now. But we do hope that everybody will stay tuned. We will be right back after these messages. Sorry. For the live Q&A. For those of you watching on Facebook, feel free to ask questions right underneath the video. Our tech will relay those questions for these two gentlemen in just a few moments.
Hi guys, my name is Juan Navarro, and I'm the co-creator of Tommy by Creature Entertainment. We're here at Tattoos and Comics in Hialeah, Florida, and we're trying to bring to you guys all 3 issues of Tommy and help us get on the road and get to San Diego Comic-Con. I started this book some years ago with John Ayua. It was something that was like a passion project for us. It was something that we just kind of put together, and it just blew up from there. Since then, we've done various different conventions like New York Comic Con, C2E2, Florida SuperCon, and everybody's been well received. Tommy's about a little boy, and he's not really understood, and he's kind of like, miscreant, kind of crazy, kind of like left to the side, and he has an imaginary friend. But he finds out that his imaginary friend's a serial killer. But not in a bad way. He's trying to like help him, grow up and become a man. We've had a lot of fun with this. We've had a lot of good times and really messed up times with it. And it's crazy how many people have received it so well. those are some of the things that we have right now, and it's been really great. And we really thank you guys for taking the time to look at this. Thank you guys so much.
Hello.
Hey.
Hey, everybody. So, what
All
did we
right.
all think about our little presentation, our question and answer session tonight? What did everybody think about it? Did you guys enjoy it?
Yeah, it was cool. I mean, watching it again and seeing everything that we were talking about and everything else, even I went back and I'm like, hey, we sounded like we knew what we were doing.
I don't
Like,
know about you.
Both,
I'm tired
Juan
of
and I
the.
have a lot shorter beards this time.
oh yes, it was that grooming time, hey.
I'm tired of the sound of my own voice at this point. But hey, let's keep going.
It
I
wasn't
got
terrible.
I that yeah I'm so I hate that too. After all, I'm like I sound like that.
So I just want to thank everybody out there for tuning in and watching us here on Miami Book Fair's Facebook, and for Juan and of course Red Bandana Gaming for restreaming, as well as a couple of other partners. Thank you guys so much. Again, I hope everybody enjoyed it. So what we're going to do first is go through the chat, and we do have some other questions outside of the chat that we're going to address, but we're going to go through the chat and everybody that commented and just address those before we get into anything else. Is there anything you guys wanted to say before we get into that, Juan or Wes?
I'll just thank everybody for watching, who checked it out, and I'm excited to see what questions we have for tonight.
Yeah, and hopefully, because I think we have it playing live in the shop actually. So
Awesome.
yeah, so there's some of the customers are looking at it right now, probably going, really? Like we have to see your
Well,
face enough as it is, and I gotta watch more of it. Okay.
well, if they like that and they want to see someone else's face, they can always head on over to YouTube and well, after all this is done, subscribe to Red Bandana Gaming on YouTube. They can do that.
There you go.
Then they can see my ugly mug. All righty. So enough with the jibba jabba. Let's get into the comments. So we're gonna go down, start from the beginning. Juan, this one's for you. Guillermo Lopez. I hope I didn't mess that up. Yo, Juan, what's up?
Oh, what's up?
So that was I guess that was the first question. And then he says, let's go Goblins Heist. Next one, he also talks about, what about the new Midnight Suns game? Have you guys familiarized yourself with Midnight Suns? Have you seen anything about it yet?
Yeah, it's a turn-based RPG game featuring some of the Marvel characters, and it's shaping up to be a lot of fun. The company that's working on that is responsible for some blockbuster titles in that arena, such as XCOM. So, based off of their past work, I'm really anticipating this one as well.
Yeah, I'm a big video game trailer fan. You know, I'm the type of guy I'll put on like WoW trailers just to like get me pumped in the morning. So I had a pretty good trailer. I like some of the gameplay. Not a big turn-based fan, but I was kind of disappointed with that, but it looks really good. It looks really fun.
That's actually what had me turn my head and go, ooh, something different. Because, just another action game. We've had a lot of those. And I was really looking forward to it. I like the new costumes. I like how they're doing it in the Midnight Suns era, even though it's SUNS instead of SONS. I thought that was a kind of interesting take. But I think it's going to be pretty good and comes out this October. So next one is we got a great comment from Miss Michelle Jessica Logan. You guys are awesome.
Yay.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And then Juan says, "Hey guys, Juan Navarro. I'm
Oh
not sure who
yeah,
that gentleman is."
I popped in there just because, like I said, we have it playing here and at the game shop. So hopefully people are tuning in. I tell them to put go on your phones.
So next one again by Guillermo. I enjoyed the old Spider-Man games and some of the current ones. I've played plenty of those. That's good. We talked quite a bit about those throughout the three parts. Okay, he's talking about the other games. All right. Hey everybody, that's for me. All right, John Lemus. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. As far as video games portraying characters, well, just look at Spider-Man: Web of Shadows. That was a fantastic game. If you guys
Oh,
didn't play that one, it was
I
very
loved
underrated.
that game. Yeah, that I had that on my Wii, and I just remember my wife would come in, and I would be like web swinging with the Wii controller, and it was exhausting, but really good game.
Yeah, I think I currently have it on the Wii and the PS3. Originally, I beat it on the 360. It was a great game.
Hmm.
Uh, he continues, it's an old game, but it's the old game. Wow. In my opinion, the best Spider-Man game. You got to swing around, like you were saying. The city helping people to get to fight venomized versions of multiple villains. It's just a lot of fun. Yeah, that was. Yeah, well, I remember fighting Wolverine, venomized Wolverine. That was really cool.
Yeah.
His next thing says we also have games like the Injustice franchise, which you brought up, Juan, with the story written by Tom Taylor. Are you guys familiar with Tom Taylor?
Yeah,
Yes, he's
the
actually
comic book writer.
comic
Yeah,
book
that's.
writer.
I don't. I'm more familiar with the artist, so of course. So, can you guys name anything that he's written for
I
the
think
people out there
his
in
the
TV
thing that
land?
everybody was talking about was his Nightwing run. I think it was. I know he's taking over some of the main Batman books right now because another writer named Tinian, he's leaving now the Batman books. So
Oh, okay.
he's been solid. I mean, I don't follow him too greatly, but I have a lot of customers that walk in and they always they tend to ask for him and look for him.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm very unfamiliar with the gentleman. So, hey, whatever you guys say, that's next one. We actually have an actual question, which I'm surprised we didn't focus on this in the in any of the parts. Has there ever been a video game adapted into a comic book? What do we lose or gain when video games are adapted into comic books if it's ever happened? Yes, it's happened
Mm,
quite often.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, I was thinking about this when I saw the question, and hopefully you guys will have some examples as well. But the first couple of things that jump to mind for me is I remember that Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2 was based heavily on the
mhm.
Civil War storyline. It was, it wasn't a perfect adaptation, but it kept a lot of the elements from that event storyline and handled them pretty well in the interactive format.
So when personally, I was thinking because it says when a game adapted into a comic book, I was thinking that Udon did Street Fighter, but
Hmm.
IDW did, if I'm not mistaken, they did the Mega Man and or was that Udon doing Mega Man? But IDW did Metal Gear Solid, and if you guys ever read those were some banger books.
Well, that was Ashley Wood as the artist. He's one of my favorite artists out there. I actually have the whole run.
Yeah,
So
so
one of
do
my
I. It was
yeah.
fantastic.
When I think about it, there's always hits and misses, right?
Hmm.
One of the things I noticed, like we have the Sonic the Hedgehog
Oh,
book in stock.
yeah,
Everybody loves it. They like the lore of it. There's people that go back for the Archie versions
yeah.
because there's so much lore. I didn't even know there was that much lore, and so there's a lot of people that collect it. The other side of it, where I see it's a miss, has been some of the Overwatch comics.
Hmm.
There's some that are good. There's some that are whatever. I just recently got a hardcover anthology in that collects all of them. Great to flip through if you're a fan of the game and you're a fan of certain characters to see some of the stories and everything else. But some of them are so flat. They're just like either the art is off or the writing's off or like they didn't put 100% on it. I think they're leaning on the fact that they're in that character. Or where it totally was just hit the wall and didn't do anything was Apex Legends. They just recently did an adaptation of, and I'm a really big fan of the lore of Legends and Titanfall. And I was like, oh, cool. I'm gonna get to No more. It didn't touch anything. It's one of these stories. It's also a story that has like no teeth in it because there's nothing that's going to happen. You know, that no character, major character is going to die. Nothing is going to be introduced. No changes happen. You go back to zero by the end of the series so that, you know, they can't mess with the lore of from this game. So
Right.
it's falls so flat and the execution was really bad. So that was like the one that I think it was last year when it came out, the Apex Legend one that really it was really disappointing.
I didn't even know they got a comic book made off of Apex.
Yeah.
It's same thing with Overwatch. I had no clue, but it kind of makes sense.
There's been a couple of series that popped up. They just recently did a 5-issue series for Tracer, which was
Mhm.
good. It wasn't too bad, but there were parts there where the art was a little lacking
Right.
and everything else. Even though like it was Babs Tarr, she's an amazing artist. I think she's awesome. But I don't know, maybe it's deadlines or something. There were some parts there where it just didn't seem as fluid. And then again, you can't do too much in the story. You can't, you know, like you're like, well, you know, Tracer's not gonna die, and then everybody else is just like whatever. And they introduce a character and it has no bearing on the game, no bearing on anything, and it just goes away. And I kind of hate that because then I just feel like, am I really reading anything or is this just a money grab?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, that also makes me think when you said Overwatch, it's Blizzard, and Blizzard tends to put out a lot of comic books to go along with their games. I think they did the same thing with Diablo, if I'm not mistaken, right? And some World of Warcraft.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there was World of Warcraft manga. There was World of Warcraft, the comic book. Some got into the lore. Some got into the actual like Warcraft lore from back then, before World of Warcraft that actually came out, the beginning of everything, and that was interesting. And some of the manga too, because some of it explained, you know, the different lore about the different races and stuff like that. So that was cool and informative. But then the characters were, you know, then they're not even found in the game. They're not found in anything. You know what I'm saying? Like I always like it to tie in.
Right. That makes sense.
I'm one of these
A lot of video
continuity
games,
guys.
there's a
Hmm?
lot of studios that are actually building the comic books like into their marketing budget now. So
Mm.
if you look, you'll see that there's been comic books for like Assassin's Creed and
Hmm.
Horizon Zero Dawn. You know, some of these big blockbusters, and they don't necessarily retell the game story, but they build out the lore of the world, explore some
Yeah,
of the hidden
and I
characters
have
like we talked
customers that
about.
love that. Like they,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm talking like, hey, there's 5 different covers. Which one do you want? And they're like, all five. I
Yeah.
want all 5 covers.
I'm awful about that too. Anything Ninja Turtles or Power Rangers, there's like 17 different covers. I'm like, give them all to me. So I'm terrible about that too. I'll guilty. So moving on to the next question, what are some comic books that have not been adapted that you think make great video games or could make great video games?
Wow.
That's so, wow. That's such a. I don't know. There's some things that I feel like it could be fun, not in a basic action game or shooting 'em up game, but you know, there's certain artists like I think a manga artist like Junji Ito. um they did, you know, seeing something of his of horror like the spirals or something and be having it, they've done recently animes based on it, seeing
Mhm.
that maybe turned into a comic book, that would be, I mean, into a video game, that would be kind of interesting to see play, because I've seen some of these like app or iPad kind of games that they play so well and they're so damn entertaining. That could be interesting too. Or I was going to say like mangas like Berserk, but Berserk had an adaptation in Dreamcast, and that was
Right.
actually a great game. But it's hard to say. Like I don't know. Like Wes, do you read anything that?
You know, I'm thinking of like what would make for interesting gameplay, you know,
Mhm.
based off of the world or the characters. So like the first thing that just popped to my mind would be something like the comic book Chew, if you remember
Mhm.
that, where it was about the detective who would eat stuff and then he would get like psychic visions and
Oh
solve
yeah, he's a
mysteries. Like to
what's called
me,
a Sybopath, I think is
yeah,
how
like
it
to me, like that could be like an interesting gameplay element and a way to
you
kind of
sell it with like a
captivate.
little module that you put in your mouth and you have to like chew on stuff.
Yeah, you know, however you could spin it, or even
Mhm.
something like which is popular right now, something like The Boys could
Mhm.
be a cool video game because there's a lot of action and there's
Mhm.
the you know, a lot of adult elements to it. So something like
Mhm.
that could be fun, or even something like, you know, sci-fi stuff always translates well to video games. So like maybe like Fear Agent or something could be cool.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
honestly,
it's really hard to think about a property that hasn't gone back and forth in one way or the other, unless you really do jump over into the manga space. And the one that I was thinking about, which could be really interesting, maybe more as an RPG, would be Death Note.
Mm-hmm.
So we had the anime, and then we had the live action Netflix mess. But I think that could be a very interesting, like JRPG style. But it's really hard to think about what property. I'm sitting here the whole time. I'm like, what are my favorite characters? They've all had video games.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like I think there's some stuff, like, again, I just look at, like, we're talking about, like, the game mechanic, something cool to, like, there's one movie called I Hate This Place, which has a very pejorative other title that you don't want to, but it's about this couple that one of them inherits his house, and it's like haunted, and it's a great indie that came out from Image Comics, and I could see that being played and having a day-to-day, almost like, let's say, like a farming game, but with a haunted house kind of like feel to it, because there's parts there in the book where she sees somebody outside, she goes to see something, she feels something on her neck, next thing you know it, she's on a railroad tracks 2 miles away, and a train's about to hit her, and her foot's stuck in the railroad track, and it's like the ghost trying to kill her. And if you would have picked, like, mix that farming game with the haunted house kind of feel, like that, to me, I was like, that works so great. Like, that would be such a weird mix to have something like that together.
So you get like Stardew Valley, or what is it, Farmville meets Silent Hill.
There you go.
Yeah, like
That would be nuts.
Yeah, and just having that, like, I'm gonna pick my corn today. How much corn did I make? Oh my god, why am I bleeding from the eyes?
It'd be called Harvest Doom.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
You're not in charge of naming things.
All right. So Junji Ito is awesome. So I hear Junji Ito is awesome. Not too familiar. But next question is, let's talk basic toolbox. What do you need to become a creator of comic books or of video games?
An iron will.
That's a big question.
Yeah. And maybe the ability to tell a good story never hurts.
Artistic talent helps. Maybe writing talent.
I feel like this is like the question they asked Conan in the movie, like, to cross your enemies, to see them doing before you, and hear the lamentations of their women. That to me is, I think it's like when you're anybody creative, you can have great ideas, and implementing them is good, but you have to convince people of those ideas. And if you want to, it's very hard to get people to join your vision. It's, I equate it to, like, starting a cult. Like, if you want to, like, start a cult, you gotta have people that say, okay, I think the sun is evil too, so let's join together. It's something like that. So I think there needs to be something where you can kind of greatly convince people to get on board with something and contribute too. I think if they can get that, when I've worked with artists, like I said, I'm a writer artist, so I've had the blessing of being able to do everything myself, but it's fun to work with other people or show people stuff. And even when I say, like, I work with a colorist or I work with somebody and they give me their 2 cents, it's always something. So I think if you're in a creative group and you say, okay, we're going to bring together, you got to hear that group. You might have the sound design guy has an idea of how this might sound, or to do a scene. Maybe it's not in his wheelhouse, but he says, oh, what if the guy said it this way? Maybe a great line. That might, you got to follow it. And if you're going to, like, again, serve the story, serve the project, serve the game, that's the thing you want to have. So that's how I see it most of the time. If you can convince and convey that idea, that energy, and get people excited about it, that's a huge skill to have.
And it's great if you can link up with people that can, like, elevate your idea, make it better than it is. Maybe you don't have the ability to draw, so you want to find someone that can execute on the vision and make it pop, make it awesome to look at. And like you said, Juan, I agree. I always tell people, like, nobody will ever believe in your project as much as you. So it's up to you to sing it from the rooftops.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're not, like I said, if you're not having fun drawing it, when you're creating it, people are not going to have fun playing it or looking at it or reading it. So you have to have that energy behind it, I think. I mean, to be very kind of crystals and hippie stuff, but that's the kind of thing I look at.
Yeah, and even if you want to break it down even more, programs, because a lot of people don't know how to start. Just learning basic programs like I know this sounds ridiculous. Maya. Maya is a 3D animation program. Building, you got animate depending on, what part of gaming you want to do, whether it's 2D or 3D. Someone who's worked with those tools, you kind of have to know those too if you want to start somewhere, or at least
Mhm.
maybe you want to get in the coding side.
Yeah.
So you have to know how to write code for a game too, depending on where you want to get in, and you just can't do it all yourself. It's tough. Well, let me take it back. There are people that have built games by themselves, but it is a lot of work.
Yeah,
So
and a lot of
building a
years, a
team.
lot of time. I mean,
Mhm.
I think in any situation, I've been an art director. I've been an art director in advertising and everything else. And one of the things I learned is that it's good to have at least the basics on anything.
Mhm.
So I'm not a video editor, but I know what a keyframe is. So
Okay.
if somebody comes in and tells me, oh, okay, the keyframe is this and this and that, just so you know what they're talking about and be like, if they have a problem, oh, I know they're not BSing me. I know what's going on. Okay, that sounds like a real, if it's like having a car, knowing some mechanics so it works. If you walk over there and
Yes,
they're like,
yes.
well, the doozy watt is totally out, man. You got to get a new doozy watt because the watt is out. So you need to put another doozy in there. And you're like,
Your widget went out.
guess what's going to happen? You're spending money. And as an art director, know that what's going on. And if not, maybe you know a trick to fix something. Because then maybe you're working with an artist or designer saying, hey, I got to repeat this pattern. I don't know how. Hey, Apple C, Apple A, V, let's go. You can do a copy and you can help out and vice versa. So I think it's always good to have those skills. You need to have the basics. And then you have when you say toolbox, like my toolbox is big. I have a lot of skills. Are they all useful all the time? No. But when they come up, it helps.
And it's great because we live in a world where you can learn how to do anything by watching YouTube videos. So,
Oh, yeah.
I would encourage people, if there's something that you want to learn, whether that's drawing or programming or writing, go find some tutorials, go find some videos that speak to you and help you understand the process behind it, and you can learn it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a great bit of information, all of that. So, with that being said, I want to thank you guys so much. We're going to end the question and answer session here, about 20 minutes. Unless you guys have anything else to add to this, do you guys want to say anything else? Like promote your store, Juan?
Oh, yeah. Well, if you're in Hialeah or Miami, you can always come to the Goblins Heist, 54 East 5th Street. You can also go to thegoblinsheist.com. Find us there. We're putting together a new website, new store. We're going to be doing online orders soon. Going to be able to do your subscription online and everything else. As for my work, I am working on some new stuff. I'm sending to print, hopefully having it for SuperCon coming up. Probably you can find out all that at Fuacata, like on my screen, FWACATA.com. You can find all my work there, my blog, everything I post up, probably this, anything else. And I post every day on my Instagram. So that's where you can find me.
Wes?
Yeah, if folks have questions about writing for comic books or for video games, please visit me online. My website is weslocher.com. Currently, I'm writing the comic book Unit 44, which is an ongoing sci-fi humor comic from Alterna Comics. New issues are coming out soon, so feel free to
Looking forward
support.
it. I can't wait to see that, Wes. And myself, I'm Logan. You can always check me out on YouTube. Head on over to redbandanagaming.com. Subscribe. That would really help. You can follow us on our socials, Instagram, Facebook at Red Bandana Gaming, Twitter at RBG_retro. You can stay in contact with us there. We do all kinds of great game reviews, gameplay videos, new products, collection, you name it. If you're into video games, we're definitely the spot to really check out, to subscribe to enjoy all the great content. So if that's going to be it, thank you guys so much for everything. Thank you for being a part of Comic Sans, and thank you all for watching. Like we always say on Red Bandana Gaming, be legendary. Thanks again.
Thank you, guys.
Take care.